You're listening to episode number 32 of the Play Your Position podcast.
Welcome to the Play Your Position podcast, where your story matters and we make it count. Here's your host, Mary Lou Kayser. Let's get started.
Kickoff, move the chains, and touchdowns. Welcome to the Play Your Position podcast, where each week another insightful conversation makes it into the end zone. I'm your host, Mary Lou Kayser, and this is the podcast that features conversations with and about people who show up and play full out each and every day. They are the people you admire: entrepreneurs, writers, artists, musicians, parents, teachers, athletes, adventurers, and their stories give us a glimpse into what it means to be human. My goal for each episode is to inspire you with stories that make you think, introduce you to cool new people, open you up to new ideas, and inspire you to keep playing full out in your life's work in order to make a difference. As always, details about each episode can be found over on the show notes page at my website, marylouKayser.com/podcast, where you will find a clickable list of each episode. Just over a year ago, I set out to launch this podcast, and quite frankly, I cannot believe that a year has passed. But what I would like to do in this one-year anniversary celebration episode is share some insights about being an entrepreneur, going out on your own, following your heart, while meeting the obligations that we all have in our lives based on the choices we make related to family, related to giving, related to our futures, and related to the kind of lifestyle that we want to lead. When I set out to do a podcast, I was inspired by my podcasting hero, who happens to be John Lee Dumas. Now, I was fortunate to be a featured guest on John's wildly popular podcast, Entrepreneur on Fire, and my episode aired back in October. Since that time, John has become even more popular and more in demand. So I bring that up because I want to point out how taking action and making decisions to move forward, regardless of whether or not the conditions are ideal, is really what separates people who experience success in life and people whose lives look pretty much the same year after year after year. Like I said, John inspired me to launch a podcast and follow a dream I had had since I was in high school, and my great Uncle Bill said to me one day, "You know what, Mary Lou, you have an amazing radio voice." And at the age of 15, I didn't understand what he meant by that, but it never left my mind. And as technology has opened up the ability for people like me, people like you who are listening today, to publish our own content on channels that we choose, I thought, why not? Why not go for it? I love sharing people's stories. You know that about me. I have emphasized that many times over the last year, and I cannot get enough of people's stories, nor can I get enough of sharing insights that I pick up through the work that I do as a consultant, as an entrepreneur, out there moving around in the world, meeting people, attending events, reading things online, following different thought leaders on LinkedIn and Facebook. And what's interesting is we are all, regardless of income level, regardless of social class, the world is at a very interesting point because of what technology is allowing us to do. With just a push of a button on a smartphone, we can broadcast a video message to the world. We can broadcast an audio message to the world. We can record and then upload a dictation that can become an ebook or a blog post or an infographic or an info product that can be shared across the world. I just had the wonderful opportunity to be a featured guest on a podcast that is hosted by a young man named Mike Wong, who will be a future guest on the Play Your Position podcast. And he's doing a business podcast, but he is a Chinese man living in Chengdu. He teaches English, and he is launching his daily podcast from his home over there and reaching an audience across the world, primarily in the United States and Canada, but he's also reaching other countries as well. And he is just one of almost 7 billion people who has the opportunity to find an outlet to get his message across. Publishing content has never been easier. It's never been more readily available to us. And yet, still, to this day, so few people are actually taking action and doing something about it. And that was one of the ideas I just wanted to muddle around a little bit today. Why is it that with the opportunities that are now really within all of our grasps, why is it that more people aren't taking advantage of these publishing platforms like podcasting, like blogging, like video marketing, like just writing regularly on LinkedIn? I think one of the biggest reasons is because it's so easy now to do, there's a natural response to pull away, maybe form some level of skepticism about whether or not a person can do it. Is it really going to pan out? And then, of course, there's also the commitment thing. They hear of someone like John who is wildly successful at what they are doing and decide, hey, I'm going to do that too, but get into it for the wrong reasons. Don't really spend any time building out a strategy, figuring out why are they going into it? Are they truly committed? Are they willing to be responsible for following through day after day after day? And human beings being human beings, it's easy to get swept up in the momentum of something that's hot at the moment, only to discover it really isn't sticking. It really isn't resonating, and you're not really playing your position, right? So I encourage those of you who are listening. We are entering the second week of February of 2015. We're 6 weeks into the new year, and you may be looking around saying, wow, I set out at the beginning of January to achieve X, Y, and Z, and I haven't even gotten close to thinking about, let alone starting anything. When I set out to record my Play Your Position podcast, I knew what I wanted to accomplish with it, and I knew why I was doing it. And my ambition wasn't to be the next John Lee Dumas or be the next Jay Baer or be the next Adam Carolla or any of the other podcasts that have over 1 million downloads every single month. My goal initially, and still to this day, remains to bring stories and ideas to a listening audience in a fresh and unique way. Feature people who might not necessarily have their stories broadcast across all the channels we have at our fingertips today, so that they can, in turn, inspire listeners to think about your life, to think about what you want to accomplish, to think about where you're headed, what your next move will be. Human beings are human beings at the end of the day, and we're all on this journey together. And there'll be periods of time when things go really, really well for us. And then there's going to be periods of time where it just feels like nothing we do can yield any kind of result that we really want. And it's just being able to slog through those tougher times to get to the good times that keeps us all going. As a podcaster of an inspirational podcast, part of my job is to put into your ears those messages that it's okay if things don't look exactly like you want them to right now. Believe me, I've been there. I will be there again as, 7 billion other people on this planet. There is no perfect journey. So what are some of the big insights that I have gleaned in a year's time, sitting in front of a microphone, planning out my guests, figuring out when guests either had conflicts or I couldn't get a guest to meet my schedule demands, what would I talk about? I've got 3 insights that I want to pass along to you, and they're in no particular order, but I think they're pretty telling about not just my own journey, but again, about this human journey that we are all on. The first big insight is that it is possible to start something before you feel ready and still succeed at it. I know there are people listening today who are just getting started on your entrepreneurial journey. You may have just left a corporate job and are starting a consulting business, or perhaps you were working for a small or mid-sized company and decided, this is the time I want to open up my storefront or my e-commerce store. All I can tell you is keep going. If that dream is big enough, it will sustain you through the early rough patches. I'm living proof of this. I started this podcast before I was ready. I was scared. I listened back to my early podcasts and the way my voice sounds, the way my interviews go, it's just, a lot happens in a very short time, and a year really isn't that long. Another thing that aligned with starting before you're ready is a year ago in January, I created a free video training course that I was giving away on my blog for a while, all around the idea of how do you tell your story. About 4 weeks ago, somebody opted in, and I decided I would go back and re-watch that training because I was thinking to myself, boy, I don't even remember all the details of it. And again, just like re-listening to early episodes of this podcast, I watched that video training from a year ago and was really excited about how decent it was, all things considered. But at the same time, looking at it and thinking, wow, I could make that so much better knowing what I know today. And so guess what I did? I sat down and I revamped the slides and I fiddled with the script a little bit to update it to where I am today as an entrepreneur and as a content strategist. I wanted to really angle my message around where I find myself now. And that's how we learn. So if I'd sat around and twiddled my thumbs or fiddled with putting together my potential guest list or using the fact that certain guests that I really wanted on this show either didn't respond to my emails or aren't ready to do it or don't want to do it, if I'd let those things stop me, I wouldn't be standing here today looking back at a year's worth of content that has gained me not only more visibility, but some new friends, some new associates, some people that I really value and like and want to promote. And you, the listener, who I don't know personally, necessarily, some of you I do, but many of you I don't. But I've got a listening audience that enjoys this content. That's pretty cool. Again, if you sit back and wait because you don't feel ready, the race is going to go on without you, and you're just going to be that much farther back from where you say you want to be. So keep that in mind. Second big insight that when I look back over the last year of podcasting is that it is okay to abandon a project that no longer serves you. I know I really struggle with this feeling, this obligation of following through, even if I'm no longer really into something. I'm not saying that if you're working on a project for a client that you just bail midstream. That isn't okay. When you've been paid to do something, you do need to see it through and you need to be a professional about it. That's my philosophy, and I always do that. The good news is I don't take on projects that don't excite me. I don't work with clients who I don't like, who I wouldn't want around my kids. I only work with people who are the kinds of folks that I would enjoy sitting on a deck overlooking the ocean, drinking a glass of wine and chatting about our favorite sports team or about where we'd like to go on our next vacation. That's how I measure the people that I bring into my world. The reality is that there are going to be projects that are outside of that framework that we all start. It could be a book or a blog or even something around the house that you just realize, you know what? I don't really want to remodel my bathroom anymore. My bathroom is just fine the way it is. Or I don't really want to move to a bigger or smaller house. The house I'm in right now is suiting my needs. I think it's easy in this time of overstimulation and constant bombardment of images and ideas, from Pinterest to just the television, to have that feeling of dissatisfaction, like what you have right now isn't enough. And that's a battle that we've been struggling with culturally for a long, long time. There was a book, I think it was published in the 70s, called I'm Okay, You're Okay. Same theme. Even Henry David Thoreau, who was writing way back in the middle of the 19th century, the 1850s, when he decided to uproot and move out to Walden Pond, which at the time was the wilderness. Okay, it isn't anymore, but back then it was, and he was out of the city, so to speak. He was seeking a life that was simpler and not materially centered. Well, the reality is most of us today are living in urban areas or suburban areas. Even if you're living in a rural area, there is still that constant bombardment of you aren't okay because you don't have this. You're not driving this car or living in this house or wearing these clothes or owning this kind of electronic device or smartphone. That's what keeps the economic engine going. But guess what? If a project in your life is not serving you, just like if a smartphone or the television or that closet full of clothes you don't wear anymore, if that's no longer serving you, it's perfectly okay to abandon it. And here's why. Number one, by doing that, you are opening up your life to new possibilities. You get rid of things, and it's not necessarily an invitation to bring in more stuff to replace it. But a lot of times we do, but we replace it with something that has more meaning and isn't as much of a weight on us because it's not cluttered, right? It isn't just this pile of stuff that every time we walk past it, we go, oh, and we feel that weight. Projects are the same way. So don't beat yourself up if you think, oh my God, I'm not on Pinterest yet, or my Twitter account is a ghost town. There's a reason it is. Abandon it and don't look back. Focus on the things that serve you. Period. Believe me, when you do that, it's amazing what opens up. It really, really is. Okay, third and final insight as a result of podcasting for a year is this. Don't be afraid to ask. It really is amazing to me how generous most people are with their time. When you ask them to be a guest on a podcast or do an interview for a book or do an interview to find out more about what they're doing professionally, it is flattering, quite frankly, to be asked to be a guest on a show, to sit down and talk about what you know related to your area of expertise. So if you're sitting here listening today and there's somebody that you've been wanting to ask something, go for it. Remember, start before you're ready. Yes, you may be a little bit, nervous and the butterflies may be there. But if you don't ask, the answer is always no. I love to watch singing competitions. My daughter is a singer and I've been a fan of The Voice. Right now, one of my guilty pleasures is watching recorded versions of American Idol. And I think American Idol has really come a long way because it's no longer about humiliating contestants as much as it is about focusing on what makes somebody a really good contestant. And yes, there are scenes here and there where people flub and do things that are embarrassing. But again, that's all part of the process. And they all sign a contract that says, hey, we have the right to show if things don't go well. That's just part of the process. Well, I was watching a recorded episode last night, and one of the gals got up on the stage, 16 years old, really pretty young girl, beautiful voice, has the guitar. She starts singing the song very strong, but about 10, 15 seconds in, she lost where she was in the song, and it was like her whole brain just got hijacked out of her head, and she was like a deer in the headlights. She couldn't figure out where to get back, had to leave the stage, went backstage. The judges were gracious and said, come back and do it again. Now, she made it through, believe it or not, despite that. But the point I'm making is you've got to get up there and go through with it. And yes, you're going to be scared. Yes, picking up the phone and asking or sending an email through Facebook or just Gmail or whatever to ask somebody to do something that is going to be part of your world. If you don't ask, the answer is no. And I'm so so happy that I moved out of my own way and reached out to people and asked, because I look back at my list of amazing guests over the last year and am so incredibly proud that their stories are now out in the world working on their behalf and on the behalf of all of us who are on our own journeys, building lives, chasing our dreams, and taking advantage of what this amazing, amazing life has to offer us. So, in celebration of 1 year of the Play Your Position podcast, I want to personally thank every single one of you listening today. If you're brand new to my show, or if you've been with me from day one, I cannot tell you how much that means to me, how much I appreciate your loyalty. Thanks so much for listening today. And remember, you've got it within yourself to get out there and make it a great day. Hey team, thanks so much for listening to another episode of the Play Your Position podcast. One of the ways that other people can discover this podcast is through ratings and reviews over on iTunes. So if you enjoy this podcast, I would be so appreciative if you took a couple of minutes to head on over to iTunes, subscribe to the podcast, and then leave me an honest rating and review. Doing that helps to get the word out and allows other people who are looking for inspirational content to find it. Again, head on over to iTunes, subscribe to this podcast, and then leave me a rating and review. Really, really appreciate it. And remember, always a great day to get out there and play your position.
Thanks for listening to the Play Your Position podcast, where your story matters and we make it count at MaryLouKayser.com.